On July 31st, 2025, the Phantom of the Opera made his return officially to New York City, although it wasn't on Broadway. Actually, it was off Broadway, and not in the version that we might typically expect. That is the brilliant original that we've grown to love over the past 35 years, or the classical stage musical. This time, it is a new, revitalized, and completely immersive experience entitled Masquerade. It is truly immersive from the moment you enter the building to the moment you leave. As of right now, there are currently tickets available through October 19th with pretty limited availability, but pretty safe to say that they are likely going to extend the run. I was lucky enough to be one of the first few people to see the production. It premiered on July 31st, Thursday, and I was able to see it on Saturday, August the 2nd. This first part of the review, I might split it up into two videos. I am going to talk as much as I can about the production without actually spoiling it. So it'll be relatively spoiler-free. It's fair to assume if you are watching this, you're probably considering or planning on going to see Masquerade. So definitely want to respect that and provide as few or no spoilers. But on the other hand, I do know that some people probably will not be able to make it out to New York. So if you are interested, I am potentially planning on doing a more in-depth scene by scene, note by note, blow by blow analysis and review of the production from back to front. I am a huge Phantom of the Opera fan. I first saw the production on Broadway in 2005 with Hugh Panaro, funnily enough, who is actually one of the cast members in Masquerade. I really didn't know too much about immersive theater when I found out Masquerade was announced. So I would say the most exposure that I've had to immersive theater up until this point was probably a Disney theme park or a, say, colonial reenactment, of if you want to call it that. When I did find out it was going to be an immersive experience, I decided to do a little bit of research on immersive theater, specifically did some research on arguably one of the most successful immersive theater productions to date, which is called Sleep No More. You may or may not have heard of it. I believe that production closed about a year ago at the time of filming this, so I was definitely curious to see how alike or how different that experience would be comparing Masquerade to Sleep No More. So first, I want to talk about some of the just overall logistics of leading up to the show, of leading up to your Masquerade experience. When you initially purchase your ticket, it is a non-transferable, non-refundable ticket. You do not actually get a physical ticket, so that's probably why you're not able to transfer a refund. Upon your purchase for Masquerade, you receive a confirmation email, but it's not until roughly 24 hours before your showtime. You get another email providing a password that will be your essentially ticket into the show. It is also 21 and up, so you do have to have your ID on you, obviously to prove that you are the person who bought the ticket, as well as, to ensure that you're 21 and up. I purchased 2 tickets under my name, and the guest I brought with me did not necessarily have to have their name match on the second ticket. They only had to produce their own ID to prove that they were over 21. So in theory, you could probably sell one or more of your tickets, but you would have to be present at the door in order to let that person in. Also, for the first 6 weeks of these performances, they ask you to dress extravagantly. They ask you to dress in cocktail attire, specifically in black, white, silver, or a mix of those colors. Some people are pretty concerned about this, but I think it's worth mentioning that it really wasn't strictly enforced. While the majority of people did, come with the dress code enforced, I did see a lady in a purple blouse. I saw a guy in t-shirt and jeans. They weren't turned away at the door. I think it is strongly encouraged because if you think about it being dressed up in monochromatic colors, If the whole audience is dressed up that way, it really plays into the immersive experience. Specifically, it's a rather nice nod to the 2004 film adaptation. Specifically, that scene of Masquerade comes to mind. Keep in mind, you and the audience are very much integrated into these scenes. I would, though, encourage everyone to dress as elegantly, but also comfortably as you can. Because, again, your outfit is part of the experience as well as the other guest experience. While they do ask for you to dress extravagantly, I would encourage folks not to wear anything too, let's say, over the top. For example, you don't want to have maybe a long train on your dress, or a long hem that you could potentially trip over because you are climbing up and down a lot of stairs. You're doing a lot of walking. Also, you're not advised to wear stilettos or anything with a small pointed heel. There are also certain parts of the show, one specific part of the show actually, where you are walking across some grating, think like New York City subway style grating. And obviously you don't want to get your heels caught in that. I wore a very chunky block heel and I was perfectly fine in that. I'm used to walking in heels, so it really didn't bother me. A lot of people are opting for ballet flats, low wedges, or even slightly dressy black and white Converse or combat boots. That's perfectly fine. I think as long as you are comfortable, as long as you're able to move around, I think that is fine. As long as you are comfortable in your outfit and you're able to move around without issue. You're also required to wear a mask. Obviously, you can bring your own mask if you want to, but part of your ticket purchase, you are given this free mask, the one I'm actually wearing right now. I believe you can get it in black or white. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe at the performance that I was at on August 2nd, they only had black masks. So maybe the white is limited to certain performances. I actually am very, very impressed by this mask. There's a convenient little drawstring in the back. You're able to adjust it. It's extremely comfortable, extremely breathable. You are wearing it for the entirety of the show for 2 hours. So I think they really knocked it out of the park with this design. So huge props to whoever came up with this design. I also love the little, nod to the original Phantom of the Opera logo with the mask in the center. And it's essentially a free souvenir that you get to take home at the end. So more on the logistics. If you have taken a peek at some of these show times on the Masquerade NYC website, you have seen that there are 6 different entrance times, otherwise known as pulses, from 7 p.m. to 8:15 p.m. And every 15 minutes, a group of roughly 50 people will be let into the show. The total runtime of each pulse, each show, is around 2 hours. So if you think about it, at one point, you have all 6 pulses happening at the same time, and they're staggered out, again, by about 15 minutes. There are 6 different Phantoms and Christines. Each Phantom and Christine are a unique pair. For example, my Phantom was Jeff Creedy and my Christine was Anna Zavelson. They are always going to be performing together. These are the only performers that are unique to each pulse. And some minor characters only have one actor playing the character for the entire evening. One particular set of performers actually have to perform their scenes at least 18 times every night. I did the math. And that's absolutely insane to think about. If you have seen the show, you know exactly who I'm talking about. If they also have matinee performances, that's doubled. So 18 times 2, 36 times. So shout out to those actors, you guys. Again, total runtime of the show is roughly 2 hours. My showtime was the last pulse at 8:15, lined up at around 8 o'clock, and probably got out of the show at around 10:15, 10:20. They start the show on time, and you absolutely cannot be late. Obviously you're moving throughout the building, so it's very, very important that you are not late. In fact, try to be as early as possible. When the show concludes, you actually exit through a sort of bar and lounge area. I'm not sure if it has a formal name, but it actually kind of looks like the Phantom's lair. Has a lounge, there's fake candles everywhere. It's really dimly lit. It's a really nice ambiance. You can sit and hang out after your show and have a drink or two, chat with your fellow audience members about what you thought of the show. I believe the bar closes at 11 p.m., so I was not able to stay for very long. But if you have an earlier show time, you can stay as long as you'd like. They also have a merchandise table at that point in the lounge, and they have a couple exclusive Masquerade shirts, a couple, I think at least one baseball cap, a couple of limited edition artwork, and I believe I also saw some Masquerade like red stationery. I'm also wearing one of the shirts right now. It's very comfortable and it has a cool design on the back. As far as accommodations go, I've heard some mixed reviews about providing ADA compliant accommodations. I've heard that they're more than compliant with wheelchair needs, but if you have any kind of concern about that, definitely reach out to the team beforehand. They have an email on their website, so definitely try to make prior arrangements to make sure that that's all squared away. I have heard that there are also bathrooms kind of scattered throughout the building, at least one on every floor. There are also attendants throughout that are kind of moving you from one room to another and make sure things run smoothly. I've heard that if you do need to use the bathroom during the show, an attendant will point you in the right direction. You know, you might miss a few minutes of a scene or might need to catch up, but I'm sure that's really no different than a typical Broadway production, other than maybe you might miss a transition going from one room to another. That brings me to the overall structure of the show. My biggest question coming into Masquerade was, how immersive is this show going to be? Is it going to be like Sleep No More? From what I heard about Sleep No More, there are actually many different possible combinations in which you can experience the show. It is almost like a choose your own adventure, sort of open world type of universe. There's different pathways. You can choose to follow different characters or wander into certain rooms. It's essentially, like I said, an open world game. I've also heard with Sleep No More that you might experience it slightly different based on if it was your first visit or if you tell an attendant or host that it's your second visit or, you know, it's not your first time. You might get more interactions or even get assigned little side quests by specific characters. So I was very, very curious to see if Masquerade was anything similar to that, you know, just how immersive is it? After experiencing it myself, 80 to 85% of the entire show is going to be the same no matter what. And what I mean by that is in terms of the structure of the show, the narrative, the beats, the order of scenes in which things happen are largely the same, with a couple exceptions. Of course, you know, due to the immersive nature of the show, there might be specific characters who choose to interact with you, who choose to interact with a different audience member. In any given scene, there's definitely that unpredictability. You can always say for certain whether a character may approach you, may brush up against you, talk to you, interact with you, hand you a prop, pull you even into a scene. So obviously there's always going to be some element of surprise, no matter how many spoilers you might try to compile across the internet, which I think that actually makes it really special. However, the one variation in the show that you might experience, there is one time in the show where the order of the scenes diverge. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you will miss any of the scenes. You will still be able to experience all of them. They're just going to be in a different order. So specifically, there was one room and that where multiple scenes take place. Let's just call it scene A, scene B, and scene C. Room number one, you might experience it A, B, and C order. Another room of audience members might experience it in B, A, and C, or C, A, B. You can experience it in 3 different orders because there are 3 different small groups that all get split up and put into different rooms. If you have seen it, you know what I'm talking about. But again, don't want to spoil it if you are planning on watching it. But other than that, you are largely going to experience the performance in the exact same way. Again, as many spoilers as you might find online, there are always going to be unpredictable, off-the-cuff, spontaneous performer interactions. For example, you might be in a particular room for a scene. you can have an interaction or experience that may not be the same at all, compared to an audience member on the other side of the room, or if they're maybe standing in closer proximity to another character in the scene. But that's where the immersive nature of the show comes in. You don't know who might come up and start talking to you or hand you a prop or bring you into the scene. But again, it does not affect the narrative overall. I think it's also worth mentioning, I guess, as a pro tip for someone who might want to maximize their character interactions throughout the show. I've observed that your demeanor, sometimes even your location in a particular room, in relation to other characters and things like that, will increase your chances. Some might think that if I'm closer to the action, I'm more likely to be immersed. That's not all. That is the case, like 50% of the time. But then the other 50% of the time, if you're in the back of a room, you might actually get interacted with. Definitely try to have open body language, make eye contact with the performers, maybe smile or laugh or nod in a way that kind of matches their energy. Be engaged with the show as much as you can. You don't want to obviously get to the point where you're disrupting other folks around you. But if you have that open body language and you reflect that you're receptive to potential interactions, then it's more likely that it's going to happen. Also, don't be holding anything in your hands. I can corroborate this because the first half of the show, I was holding my phone in my hand the entire time. But I noticed that my interactions were minimal to none. I would have some characters or performers speak to me, just kind of offhand or ask me a question, but then they'll move on. Whereas if you want more prolonged interactions, you definitely want to have your hands free. There was at least one scene where you are offered a drink, champagne. And I would recommend either not accepting it or taking it and very quickly finishing it so that you can increase your chances of interactions. I noticed when I put my phone away in my pocket in the second half, I had a lot more notable performer interactions. So definitely something to keep in mind. So before I knew anything about the show or the pulses and the logistics of that, I was very curious to know if I would get the same Phantom for the entire performance. Would it be the same actor? Could I get as many as 4 or 5 Phantoms throughout my single experience? The answer to that is no. You are always going to have the same Phantom and the same Christine throughout the whole show. I mean, that goes for every character, actually. Obviously, just like any other performance, barring emergency or an understudy needing to be put in. As of right now, the general consensus between cast members and viewers is that at a certain time, a certain Phantom and Christine are scheduled to play. For example, the performance that I saw at 8:15. At 8:15, Jeff Creedy and Anna Zavelson are scheduled to perform as the Phantom and Christine at that time at pulse number 6. As of recording, the expected Phantom, Christine, and Raul casts for each time slot. For 7 o'clock, Phantom is played by Kyle Scatliff, Christine is played by Aaron LaCroix, and Raul is played by Nick Edwards. 7:15, you have Telly Lung as Phantom, Haley Ferrier as Christine, and Francisco Javier Gonzalez as Raul. 7:30, Hugh Panaro as Phantom, Francesca Murata as Christine, and Paul Adam Schaefer as Raul. 7:45, Nick Walker plays Phantom, Kaylee Ann Voorhees plays Christine, Nick Edwards plays Raul again. Clay Singer plays Phantom at 8 p.m. Riley Nolan plays Christine, and Raul is played by Francisco Javier Gonzalez. 8:15 is Jeff Creedy as Phantom, Anna Zavelson as Christine, and Paul Adam Schaefer as Raul. So just based on those observations alone, I think it's interesting that you have one performer playing Raul twice a night. Just something to point out. Since I'm a very big fan of the brilliant original, the stage production we all know and love, I was a little concerned about how much of the musical would be kept intact, specifically from a music standpoint, from a song standpoint. There are so many classic songs that we know and love, that we grew up with, that are near and dear to our hearts. Are some of them going to be completely cut? Are they going to be eliminated in favor of new songs? There are certain sequences, certain songs that make the Broadway production what it is. There's a reason why it's such a classic. For example, the title song, Music of the Night, All I Ask of You, Wishing You Were Somehow Here Again. All of those are very, very classic, some of our favorite songs. And so I was a little worried that some of those might be cut. However, not to worry. All of those classic songs that we know and love are still fully intact in this Masquerade production. However, I will say that there are some more minor songs that are abbreviated, not fully cut, just abbreviated. And that is because they've added some songs that are not in the original Broadway production. That's all I'm going to say. I will not say anything more because otherwise I'm going to spoil it. So all of those iconic songs are still in the show. I think it would be remiss of this creative team, the production, to leave out these songs altogether. But not to worry, you will experience all of them in full. I know that some folks might be a little bit disappointed that the minor songs might be more abbreviated or changed, but keep in mind this is a new revitalized version of Phantom of the Opera. So to me, it makes sense that they would want to put new moments in the show. I personally did not mind it because, again, there are no songs that are completely left out. So I personally did not mind the changes too much. Also, in terms of music, another concern that I had was the orchestration, the score. How are we going to handle the music and backing tracks that the performers sing along to? One of the appeals of the original Phantom Broadway production was the fact that they had a full live orchestra all the way up until closing on Broadway, and it was really fabulous to be able to experience that in full, the live orchestra. Obviously, with the new production, the possibility of a full live orchestra is impractical at best, and at worst kind of impossible, considering we're constantly on the move, going up and down stairs. So it just doesn't make sense to have a full orchestra for this immersive experience. The sound design in general is arguably one of the most important aspects to making an immersive production successful, immersive experience. Personally, I think it was handled very, very well in this particular production. Obviously I'm speaking with little to no experience. This is my first real live immersive theater experience, but I definitely appreciated that even during the transition periods, as the audience moves from one room to another, as we're going up and down staircases, as we are passing down hallways, it is pretty seamless. The only mishaps I could think of were during parts of the title song, the sequence with Phantom and Christine singing. There were certain times where the microphones were cutting out, but that happens. It's not uncommon, even in a traditional Broadway production, for something like that to happen. You could definitely chalk it up to being a new production and they're still working out the kinks, but certainly not an uncommon occurrence for mics to be cutting out. Speaking of microphones, I actually noticed that in a couple of the more intimate scenes where we are in smaller rooms, the microphones are fully turned off while a character was, talking or singing. That definitely works for me. I thought it was really, really cool to have a character singing or a performer singing with no amplification. And it just made the experience that much more, intimate, immersive. I think it actually would take you out of the moment if you had a character right up in your face and the mic was turned on with, they were singing with amplification. I definitely felt it was extremely seamless in terms of sound design. It's clear to me that, as you move from one room to another, they're handling these transitions with great care especially from a music standpoint, but just from a visual, sensory standpoint. For example, typical transition would be that you hear sort of a medley, as you transition maybe from song A to song B. It'll be just sort of like traditional instrumental music blending one room from another. Sometimes these are very, very short transitions where you're, doing a quick change, if you want to call it that, going from room A to room B. Sometimes you are going through multiple rooms and multiple hallways, multiple passageways, and that transition can last up to 3 minutes. Sometimes you even hear some disembodied voices singing as you're passing through, and you are experiencing, obviously very detailed levels of props and set decorations. So I think it's really interesting to see how dynamic those transitions can be. I think that's actually one of the more exciting parts of the show. Overall, the music and scoring was handled very well. As much as I don't want to spoil it, there is actually one part of the show where you are experiencing live music. There is one performer who plays an instrument, not the piano. That's obvious. Even in the regular Broadway production, characters are playing the piano as part of rehearsals. There is one particular performer where, at least in one or two scenes of the show, they are playing live music at certain parts. And I think that's really lovely. One of those instances is actually a pre-show scene. It's somewhat of an overture track. And I also think that's one of the most well done parts of this immersive experience. That moment does a really nice job of bringing people into this atmosphere, into the world of Masquerade, a Phantom of the Opera. It's clear that, the audience is a little bit apprehensive. We just came in from the hustle and bustle of the streets of New York. And so this one performer, with their music and the particular design of the room and the scene and the ambiance, I think it does a really nice job of putting the audience at ease and bringing us into this almost time capsule. And I think it's really well done. My first reaction is that I want to see it again. So I think that kind of speaks for itself. If I didn't like it, I don't think I'd want to see it again. So like I said, I experienced the show with Jeff Creedy and Anna Zalvelson. Would absolutely recommend seeing them at their 8:15 performance time. I would love to see the show again with a different set of Phantom and Christine, just to see how they, how the interpretations differ. I would be lying if I said I didn't want to see Hugh Panaro, because again, he was my first Phantom. I would love to have, a full circle moment and see him, 20 plus years later. I do have some minor but important critiques. Most know by now that there have been, costume upgrades, costume changes compared to the original production. One of the first publicity photos that was released as part of, the promotion for Masquerade NYC was a photo of 3 different costumes. One of them was Christine's cloak for the rooftop scene. One was a Hannibal costume and one is a Masquerade costume. I have to admit, that particular photo got me a little nervous. Not because I didn't like the costumes, but, I don't think I'm the only one to say that I'm very attached to the design of the original costumes in the Broadway show. They're intricate, they're beautiful, they're so well done. These are period costumes, and I think they are done very, very well. I remember seeing the picture of those costumes and thinking, they're not necessarily drastic changes, but like I said, there's some iconic costumes in the production of the original Broadway version. So are those going to stay? Are they going to be upgraded? Are they going to be cut? And fortunately, there are a couple costumes that are very iconic that are not in the production. Don't want to spoil it at this point, but there are surprisingly some very iconic costumes, at least in my eyes, that are no longer in this version. As a whole, I do understand why they might have been cut from like a narrative, logistical perspective, but it's still disappointing. As a super fan, I was really looking forward to these. I have one specific costume in mind that I won't say what it is, but there was one particular costume I was very, very much looking forward to seeing their interpretation of, and it is not in the show. Another critique that I have is in terms of the character development. There is additional character development for certain major characters, and I don't think that in itself is a bad thing, but unfortunately it comes at the expense of the character development for others, right? So from a logistical standpoint, you can't necessarily have crazy character development for every single major character. In this case, they chose to focus on developing one specific character, and that kind of came at the expense of others. Not that anything was cut, it's just, what you see in the Broadway show is more or less what you're going to see in this version of the show. You don't really get any new moments, scenes, lines of dialogue, things like that. So again, it makes sense realistically that you can't give every single character, development, but it is worth noting that some of this character development that happens comes at the expense of missing out on other characters' potential backstories. Overall, though, I would say that the entire show is a great experience. I am almost definitely going to see it, hopefully with Hugh Panaro as a Phantom. I will say, again, without actually wanting to spoil, there is something that happens at the end of the show that is Very, very surprising. I did not see it coming. Does it change the ending of the Broadway production? Technically, no, but like there's an additional like bonus scene. I guess you could call it like an after credit scene if this was a Marvel movie. That is so shocking in the best way possible, to the point where myself and a lot of the audience members were like crying, like fully sobbing during this point. I don't want to explain it right now. I will maybe talk a little bit about it in my future in-depth analysis of the show, but even as much as I try to explain it, it will never fully capture what I felt and experienced in that moment. You just kind of like have to be there. So that experience alone, I think, makes it completely, completely worth it. I think if you are able to, definitely go see the show. I know some super fans are trying their best to see all 6 different pulses with the different Phantoms and Christines. I would love to do that if I had the money. Maybe I can monetize this video, make it happen. That would be great. But I'm going to do everything I can. Hopefully this production gets extended through next year, and I'll be able to make that a reality. I think as much as we love these characters, I think one of the most exciting parts of this show, of this production, is seeing how different actors interpret, Phantom, Christine, and Raoul. Overall, the team did a great, great job of staying true to the original production, but offering a lot of new and exciting experiences in terms of characterization, scenes, costumes, music, and obviously the whole viewer experience, with this production being immersive. I thought it was very, very well done. I'm really excited to see how this show potentially evolves over time, whether it be, very small changes, very large changes. I think there's definitely a possibility in that. So I'm sure people will record their experiences. I'd like to maybe compare my initial experience on the first weekend of previews to, maybe a month and a half from then, to see if the production changes drastically. I don't think it will, but it's still interesting to see that this production is definitely evolving as it continues on. Hopefully this review helped you, and hopefully it convinces you to see it, because I definitely think if you're a Phantom fan, you should see it. And with that, I think that's the end of my review for now. Please let me know if you would like to see a more in-depth analysis with heavy, heavy spoilers. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you around. Bye.